Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Energy, our monthly webinar series presented by the Denver Museum of Nature and Science and the Institute for Science and Policy. I'm Trent Noss, managing editor at the Institute and your host for the series. Thanks so much for joining us. If you're back for joining us again, welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're glad that you discovered this series. This is episode 8, and today we are going to be talking about money, entrepreneurialism, and investment, which are important factors in the ongoing energy transition. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. These episodes are recorded and they're available on the Institute's YouTube page after the fact. So if you miss an episode, want to catch up on something that you didn't see before, everything will be available. And of course, we'll post everything on our social media channels as well. So today, I'm really excited to have this conversation. We are in the midst of a really exciting time in the clean energy transition. There is a lot of investment happening at all kinds of scales, from small businesses, entrepreneurs, startups, and then at a much larger level, governments, hedge funds. There's a lot of interest and investment happening at all these different levels. And so we're going to unpack it today with someone who knows this landscape very well and can speak to some of the interesting elements that have been happening in recent decades. So let me welcome in Seth Terry. He is the CEO of New Day Hydrogen and a longtime friend and advisor to the Institute and a longtime entrepreneur in this space. He's worked in food, water, energy, fuel, all kinds of interesting areas. Seth, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I love what you guys are doing at the Institute. I love what you do with this series. So very honored that you've invited me on. I will share my screen here. I have a very short deck and we'll put it into presentation mode, hopefully. And does that look okay, Trent? And are you hearing me all right?
All looks good.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm going to tell you, as Trent had suggested, I'm CEO for New Day Hydrogen, and I'll speak to how we feel fast fueling and clean air fit into the emerging transportation transition taking place here in Colorado and across the nation and across the world. But before I do that, I will give a little bit of background on just what it is that I've kind of done from a CV perspective, if you will. First thing I did, I guess, I was born. I was born here in Colorado, Denver, Boulder area, and I spent most of my life here. But as part of that, I feel very much attached to this landscape, to this place, and its place in our beautiful democracy of the United States. So this is all very important to me and has a very strong connection to what has become me going forward. That said, my education, I was thinking back on this, it really does go back in many ways to the Denver Museum, which at the time was, when I was a young kid, was the Museum of Natural History. Spent a lot of time there and really had an appreciation both for nature as well as the vast time scale of the natural world in which we live. And I think that had an important formative aspect. Left Colorado to go to high school and college back east. I ended up actually becoming a history major, particularly in French history, while I was at Princeton University. And as part of that, had a great opportunity to spend 2 summers living and working in France and got some very important global perspective while I was over there doing that. As far as early career, I spent first job coming out of college in management for information systems, consulting in that before really getting back to what I think were the greater roots for my own passions, which were in science and natural systems. I earned a PhD at the Colorado School of Mines in the Environmental Science and Engineering Division, and then spent some time working at Tetra Tech as a consultant in water and wastewater treatment. However, the entrepreneurial itch hit me while I was working in both School of Mines and at Tetra Tech, and ended up founding a company that produced sustainable, harm-free protein in the context of treating wastewaters and scavenging nutrients from breweries and other food and beverage manufacturers. Did that, wrapped up, had an exit in 2016, and then have moved into energy efficiency and now into hydrogen with the work in New Day Hydrogen. And so that speaks a lot to kind of what I've done, but I don't think that it really gets at who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So I wanted to put together this little bit of slide here that speaks a little bit more to on the personal journey that I've taken, and really gets back to, as I say, those Colorado roots and the place. I spent a lot of time in the mountains of Colorado, spent a lot of times hiking and camping, and subscribed very much to the leave no trace philosophy. As I grew older and saw more of the world, I really wanted to be able to apply that on a global level, and really that's what got me into my first career in water and wastewater treatment, moving kind of towards understanding of the biological processes that were involved with that. Moved me into food, the sustainable protein space, and now into zero emissions energy. As I have progressed along this pathway, I feel like I'm almost kind of honing in more on the root cause of some of the issues that we're facing with respect to climate change. So, getting back to that zero emissions thought and what we're doing at New Day Hydrogen, why do I care about zero emissions? Well, as I said, place has always been something very important to me, and this is Denver, Colorado. This is the place that I idealize, and on a day like today, pristine and gorgeous, it looks very much like this picture right here. However, that is not always the case, and this is what drives me to action. We are looking at an increasing occurrence of a skyline that looks more like this picture now, and whether that is derived from forest fires as a result of climate change or from direct emissions from vehicles and power generation, this is a real issue that we're facing here in Colorado and in many other parts of the world, obviously. Our stake is such that with respect to greenhouse gas emissions, the governor's office this year put out a pollution reduction roadmap with respect to greenhouse gases. And in that report are calling for 940,000 electric vehicles to be deployed on our roads between now and 2030, the end of the decade. Well, that's only 9 years away. And our reality right now, with about a decade of deployment for battery electric vehicles, is that we're just over 30,000 electric vehicles on the road right now. So our thinking is that battery electric vehicles cannot serve all customers. And if that were the case, obviously we would see a much higher deployment than we have, and that consumers actually need another option. Unfortunately, and fortunately, that option does exist, and that's what we're seeking to provide. That option being one where we can have both the zero emissions and the rapid refueling that we're used to with our current vehicles. We can do that by looking at fuel cell electric vehicles, FCEVs, and these are vehicles that only emit water vapor as a result of their energy consumption. It is not combustion. We are not talking about a combustion engine here. It's a fuel cell engine that operates at far lower temperature and far more efficiently. But it does provide the benefit, as I indicated, of being able to fill a tank, doing so quickly and on demand. And in such a way, we expect that it can meet consumers at their need, can provide a one-to-one replacement of current vehicles so that it could be a person's exclusive car if they wanted it to be so. And it can also provide that same service at the much larger vehicle level, for example, buses and fleet vehicles. And as I indicated before, it does not require a behavior change. We can fill the tanks of these fuel cell electric vehicles in a matter of minutes, just like we do right now with gasoline and diesel. And so just to wrap up very quickly here, what it is that we're seeking to do at New Day Hydrogen, and that is to develop a hydrogen hub here in Colorado. We feel for a number of reasons, Colorado is an exceptional place for us to launch this hydrogen hub. And that would include not just the fueling stations that we would be developing, but also fleets of medium duty trucks or light duty passenger vehicles that might be in delivery services, for example. We'd also be speaking with transit authorities and roadside assistance fleets. And obviously, if we're going to deploy these fuel cell electric vehicles, there has to be some maintenance that goes along with that. So it's bringing together a large number of stakeholders, many of whom we've already had substantial conversations with, in order to create really what's going to be an alternative to our current combustion engines, and a new way of having electric vehicles on the road that extends beyond battery electric vehicles. And so with that, there's certainly, just getting back to the company, feel free, love to speak with anybody interested in learning more about what we do. And I'm sure that link will be dropped into the chat. But beyond that, I will stop the share, and we can open it up, Trent, to questions.
Great, thank you, Seth. That was great to hear about your personal journey and certainly your long experience in this area. We're going to get into the discussion here. I would encourage the audience to drop your questions into the chat as we go along. We'll try to incorporate as many as we can. We're going to have a pretty wide-ranging discussion, so please don't be shy. I think we're going to, for the purposes of this session, we're going to stick with the micro, and we'll work outward to the macro. I'm curious, Seth, in the time that you've been working in the clean tech sector, and you've moved through some different companies, and you've seen this landscape evolve, what have been some of the most stark or noticeable changes in the landscape, maybe just in the last couple decades? What has really stuck out to you as improving for good, or I shouldn't say improving, just changing for good or for ill?
I really have to say that, well, let's back up, because I think most of it is good. But I think that for ill, we're not making the progress we need to at the speed we need to really have a dent in the impact we're making on climate change right now. So that would be kind of the negative backdrop. But I would say that on the positive side, we are absolutely speaking at many different levels, governmental and investment, however it is, even in public discourse, on a much more sophisticated level about the realities of the challenges that we're facing right now. And that to me is remarkably validating. And just anecdotally, when we started our business and we're talking about alternative or sustainable protein, that was something that we had to do an awful lot of education for investors and for anybody that we were speaking to about our endeavors. I don't think that you have to do that to that extent anymore. I mean, they're absolutely harm-free proteins, sustainable proteins. Those are categories on their own right now. And microbial protein is hardly something that people think of as being odd anymore. So looking at it from that lens, same thing you can apply to renewable energy as well. I mean, it was certainly an idea 5-10 years ago that wow, okay, we might be able to apply wind, we might be able to apply solar in some niche type of applications, but I don't know that people really anticipated the degree to which those would become the low cost new types of energy to put on to grids, and that coal would be replaced and retired to the extent that it has been and will continue to be. Then finally on that other third leg of the stool, from a perspective of water, I think people are much more aware, even beyond the West here, of the limitations and the challenges we face with respect to clean natural water sources, and the demands that we're placing on those, whether it be from industry agriculture, chemical production, whatever it is. And again, there's so much more real discussion, real investment, and real opportunity, going into innovating to meet those challenges. So that's super exciting. And then the last thing that I would say that, wrapping all that together, I'm a big tent guy, and the fact that you can put all these and people together, and people are starting to speak holistically about how these challenges can be met, whether from an economic perspective, from a technical perspective, but across water, across energy, across food, and really starting to look at these problems as things that are certainly not neat solutions, where there are no neat solutions are available, but where they really need to be tackled in a very holistic manner.
Absolutely. I'm curious, from your experience in the field, as entrepreneurialism can be very scary. It's a lot of risk involved, and I'm curious, as you have developed products and services and tried to build out market demand for them, what are some of the challenges there? You mentioned earlier in your opening remarks about the idea that it's hard to get people to change their behavior sometimes. We sometimes build to make that the ease of transition much simpler. I'm curious about building out demand and building up recognition for something that can be potentially very disruptive if it gets a toehold.
Yeah, and I think that that's a place where one of the biggest challenges really is inertia. I mean, it's so much easier to go the route that is already proven, that is already in a marketplace, and from that extends whether you're speaking to regulators or investors. It's kind of tough to be first out there, and yet as an entrepreneur, of course you are deluded into thinking you've got this great view of this wonderful future, and therefore you are willing to be the tip of the spear. And so, along with that really comes, absolute recognition and a willingness to, provide education across as many different, groups and stakeholders as you possibly can, in order to advance that vision into that, brighter future that you can see, and not so many people are seeing it in the same rosy way that you are, and they are skeptics, and so and that's fine. I mean, there are a lot of different competing interests, of course, to bring to bear, and it can't be all kind of starry-eyed dreams. It's also got to be about the pragmatism of putting together projects and being able to provide return to investors that meet their needs as well.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we're getting a lot of great questions in the chat about your business and hydrogen specifically, so I want to stay there for a minute. Tell me about how you're approaching, how you're positioning hydrogen as a solution, and how hydrogen can fit into some of our current needs and wants, especially in the wake of looking at potentially a big infrastructure bill coming up and a new transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg. How are you looking at some opportunities in this sector to build hydrogen in?
Yeah, well, like I said, to me, it's so much about driving towards decarbonization, and there's clearly an imperative for doing that and increasing recognition around doing that. But there are different ways to do that, especially in transportation. And if we look, exclusively and saying, that the best means of doing that is to completely decarbonize transportation, well, that leaves you kind of with two options: battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. I think that one of the challenges right now is that there's a lot more recognition around the presence of battery electric vehicles than there is around fuel cell electric vehicles. And so that's what we are trying to do as part of that education process is really bring out the places where fuel cell electric vehicles can meet consumers and fleet users at their needs. And if you have what is called heavy duty cycle or long haul type of approaches, where you can't afford the time to recharge a battery over night, or you don't have a place devoted in your home to be able to recharge every night, or you're going to have a trip that you need to take that is going to take you beyond really, what is the range that you might have in cold weather, or going up steep grades, or whatever it is. There are lots of applications that speak to fuel cell electric vehicles over battery electric vehicles. And so as part of bringing those out there to attention, speaking to, for example, there was an article, I believe today in USA Today, that speaks a lot to how battery electric vehicles, really are at this point supplementing many users who also own their own standard combustion engine type of vehicles. And so that, the average electric vehicle is putting something like 5,000 to 6,000 miles per year, whereas the average vehicle is putting more like 12,000 to 13,000 miles per year. So it's clearly indicating that, not all of our needs, our average needs, are being met with battery electric vehicles. And yet, as I say, the imperative is there. We've really got to electrify transportation. So as far as what we're trying to do, it's really about, we feel like putting in that fueling infrastructure is critical, obviously, but we can't do that alone. I mean, it doesn't make sense. As going back to, from an investable position, it doesn't make sense to put in that infrastructure unless you have offtake for that infrastructure. And so we're spending a lot of our time right now speaking to the fleet owners and others about how hydrogen would play well into their decarbonization efforts.
I'm curious about the interplay between invention and policy. And maybe this is a little bit of a philosophical chicken and egg question, but the idea that you have an innovative technology that comes along and policy adjusts to incorporate that technology, or whether it's policy that comes along with incentives or sets decarbonization goals, for example, like we have here in Colorado, and then the technology that's the drive to really ramp up technology that was maybe in the incubation stage. Could you tell me a little bit about how you view that dynamic and what you think the appropriate balance is there?
Yeah, well, that's super interesting, because I think my answer has changed dramatically from what it would have been 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I think that my perspective would have been that in order to get this kind of change in the broader society, that you were really going to have some strong federal incentives to help move this along and provide the right market signals. And I would say that, for me, the greatest surprise really over the last 4 to 5 years has been the extent to which these innovations have, in renewables and putting wind and solar onto the grid, have developed really despite antagonism at the federal level. And so that, as I say, is the biggest surprise. So clearly, government support is at the federal level is not absolutely essential to make things move in a positive direction going forward. But in this case, there was a very strong market signal that was sending it there. Nevertheless, that said, the government in itself is one of the largest consumers in the United States, and just by their very choices in how they acquire their own goods and services, they can go a long way towards supporting the right kind of policy that goes through. So I think it's absolutely government is a strong modifier to help in the right kind of direction, and can provide that direction, looking out beyond the normal horizons of say a business cycle or even technology development cycle, where they can look ahead 20 years, 30 years down the road, as it was going to be important here with climate change mitigation, and be able to provide those signals and that consistency in the market.
So speaking specifically again to hydrogen, but certainly applicable to other areas of clean tech, cost competitiveness. We had a question in the chat about hydrogen as cost competitive and what some elements there. I'm curious how when treading new water, so to speak, how you work on bringing the price down, or at least making it so that people can adopt this technology if they're able to.
Yeah, well, so from the fuel perspective, we're situated actually quite well here in Colorado, as we've done as much decarbonization as we have on the grid, and you have players such as Xcel Energy that have sent pretty clear signals as to where they would like to see renewables and clean energy and zero carbon going on the grid. So as a result, actually there's pretty good pricing for electricity here in Colorado. Our stations would make hydrogen fuel via electrolysis, do that on site, and so obviously the electricity that goes into those stations is an important cost factor for us. We feel that in the current landscape, we can support our operations and be able to deliver hydrogen fuel at a roughly equivalent price to gasoline right now. That's actually getting helped out a little bit as gasoline prices have started to rise again. So I think that with the appropriate kind of incentive structure, we'll be able to manage what we need to do on the operational side. That said, we still need to support the capex for our fueling stations, and then going to the other side on the consumer side and on the fleet side, there's those fuel cell electric vehicles. Those are all made in relatively small numbers right now, so relatively high per unit prices. And there, you're getting help from the OEMs such as Toyota, for example, who are absolutely working on getting that price down, but also providing some other incentives to consumers such that they can get fuel cell electric vehicles like their Mirai out in California at prices as low as a net cost of $20,000 for a vehicle by the time you take in government support and fuel credits that they provide back. And I think that you see, as we've seen with solar cells, with lithium-ion batteries, with wind energy, the unit prices go down dramatically as you start to scale and as you adopt more of those resources into the economic system.
Well, zooming out for a minute, it has seemed like in recent years, and certainly going back even decades, there have been more calls for divestment from fossil fuels. We've seen movement among some of the big hedge funds and venture capital money. It seems like there's a tectonic shift happening that has been slow, and maybe we're still certainly right in the middle of it. But how do you see that some of that big money on a global scale? What have you noticed over the last several decades?
Well, you hit right on it. I mean, that people in very large institutions at the investment level are even speaking in terms of decarbonization and looking at that is a massive tectonic type of shift here already in the landscape. And I think that what's really happening broadly is that these players are starting to look at risk mitigation, and they are seeing that we are at many different levels across society, across economies, exposed to increasing amounts of risk as a result of climate change. And if you back that up further, kind of go down to those root causes, like I was explaining in my journey, energy is so much at the root of a lot of that. And so I think that this speaks really well to why you're seeing the Larry Fink of BlackRock coming out what was it, 3 years ago already, talking about how they're going to start putting a lot of their the companies in which they invest on notice. And at the time there was a lot of discussion. Is this really serious? Is he just doing this to be self-serving? Well, in subsequent letters, and the actions of BlackRock, they're showing some teeth on that in terms of saying that we're not going to continue investing in a lot of companies that have a lot of fossil fuel exposure. And by the way, if you don't start incorporating that risk into your balance sheet somehow or into your business plan, we're going to basically move away and look at other opportunities. And it's not that BlackRock is altruistic and trying to move the needle on their own. I think they're doing this in their own economic interest, because their opportunity is much better for them if they can invest in companies that have looked at these risk profiles and have taken those to heart in their business plan and in their future planning.
Well, and I think you hit on it right there. We've certainly seen the same thing happening at a corporate level. We've seen corporations building out ESG initiatives, and then we at sometimes run into a little bit of the danger of the dreaded greenwashing, where we slap a green banner on something, or we put out a descriptive press release, but there's no action underneath it. Do you see any danger there in overcorrection, or are corporations really, as you say, showing some teeth on this and moving in this direction?
Yeah, well, I think that there's always that risk, and I think that you step back a little bit further on this, and you have a lot of interest in investing in so-called ESG companies, and I never understand what is meant by an ESG company, because you can't really sell ESG as a product, so much. Maybe some consulting services or something along that. But I think that really what it speaks to is a company aware, going back to that last question, of what these risks look like going forward, and whether those are from an environmental perspective or from a social perspective or governance perspective. A company that is looking at those in a honest and risk wary perspective, and looking into the future, is going to do an awful lot better with their planning than a company that is absolutely disregarding that. And so you look at companies. I think it was BP in the news this week, who had divested of some of their assets that were particularly dirty assets from a fossil fuel perspective, and use that in there to kind of boost their green credential. Well, they got hammered by that in the press, because they weren't actually getting rid of those; they were just offloading them onto somebody else. That said, it's not to beat up on BP and what they're trying to achieve by having that divestment in their own asset portfolio. But I think that speaks to the fact that there are more people watching right now, and that they are holding these companies more accountable for their actions. And I think this is ultimately a good thing for all of us, because if we're all of us, I should say, who are intent upon getting change that mitigates climate effects.
And how do you think COVID looms so large over all these discussions? Are there ways that you think that COVID has scrambled the equation at all? Are there some opportunities as the pandemic eventually recedes here that we'll be able to take advantage of?
Yeah, well, I think that what was something that I hoped for right when this happened, and again, you want to fix one problem, but I also had hoped that it would focus attention on another problem. And that is, I viewed the acute problem of COVID and the chronic problem of climate change, and that those really require a very similar type of conversation in order to address those, because they're such broad societal and global issues. I think that what has been such a surprise to me as we've gone through this is the accelerator for change that COVID-19 has proven. And I think that we were kind of slow walking towards a number of these solutions, and I think that we have picked up that pace immeasurably, and we're not going to be able to go back to what it was before the pandemic. I think that on that note, we've got a significantly increased appreciation around the challenges and the role that science plays, and this Institute for Science and Policy is a big piece of that. Trying to advance that discussion, and then this greater understanding, I think, that is emerged around the positive role that government can play in terms of trying to bring about innovation and change at a societal and broad economic level. So I think that we are in a place where to some extent we've been helped by having this significant break with the past that is represented by the pandemic, and we've seen it in broad, going back to the ESG and that S part of that component, societally, what we have seen in terms of recognition, for oppressed peoples and oppressed communities and whatnot is, seems to be light years away from where it was a year and a half ago.
Well, and we're still in the first 100 days or so of a new administration. I alluded to the transportation infrastructure bill that's in the works right now. Are you watching for anything at the federal level right now? Is the action going to be at the state level with Colorado and some of its initiatives that are working? What are you going to be watching for here over the next couple of years?
I think kind of going back to what's moving a little more parochially here into what it is that we see at New Day Hydrogen. Obviously very pleased that there is an infrastructure plan that appears to be coalescing, and that it is a significant one, and that it appears very much in line with looking at decarbonization and climate. I think that all that said, the thing that I'm going to be watching for is are they dialing an answer, or are they dialing an outcome? And what I would like to say is that the outcome is decarbonization, and that there are a number of different options around how that could take place. And as I've said a couple of times here, and I apologize for repeating myself, but this optionality around the electrification for transportation, and just an appreciation that there are other approaches besides battery EVs that so many people just aren't aware of yet, and that we really need to be focused on meeting that end goal, that outcome of decarbonization. And we need to let the market really suss out what it is that what consumers are going to want, and what companies and businesses are going to want in order to achieve that outcome.
Absolutely. And then just in terms of some things that you'll be doing here at the state level, obviously infrastructure build out is an important one. We had a couple questions in the chat about retrofitting, and the question of whether these EVs are going to have to be, are they all separate vehicles? How difficult is it going to be to retrofit existing stations? Maybe have a word about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting at the vehicle level. I mean, although it is certainly possible to retrofit, whether you're talking batteries, whether you're talking hydrogen, it's really not going to be an economical option. So I think that will be a great place as it is right now. You're seeing with battery electric vehicles, some devoted hobbyists who are converting classic cars into EVs. I think that's going to be where that's going to stay. So unfortunately, it is going to be new vehicles. That said, you go back onto the infrastructure side, and one of the great things about hydrogen is that it's a substance, it's a molecule that we're transporting. And in that way, it's, analogous in a lot of ways to, natural gas, which we're moving through pipelines, or liquid fuel that we're moving into market. And there are technologies that can utilize existing fueling station infrastructure, for example, underground tanks at an existing fueling station, which could put a liquid organic hydrogen carrier, would be the way that the hydrogen is brought and trucked in using an existing type of transportation, liquid transportation vehicle, bring that in and deliver a hydrogen carrier to the fueling station in a way that's very analogous to what we're doing. Then on site, there would be equipment that would basically dehydrogenate that liquid, which is an oil, and then use that hydrogen for refueling vehicles. So it's a really, again, one of the things I like about hydrogen is that you can repurpose a significant amount of existing infrastructure, and even if you start looking up at power plants. There's a lot of good work being done at retrofitting existing power plants, even coal plants, to be able to burn hydrogen.
Yeah, I think we could probably do another whole session just on the science behind it. It is really fascinating.
I love the technical aspects of it, no doubt. But the social ones as well. I mean, it's really fertile ground.
Yeah, well, definitely. Well, we just have a few more minutes of your time, Seth. I wanted to get you out of here on a question about just, again, entrepreneurialism writ large. And if you were talking to a group of budding entrepreneurs, people who are interested, students who want to get into this world or get into this nexus between clean tech and policy, for example, what would you tell them? What would you tell them about drawing on your own experience? What advice would you perhaps give?
Go into it eyes wide open. It's not an easy route to take. A lot of what we spoke about in some of those earlier questions. It's you're going to have a vision that the way that you think things should be, and it may very well even be the right vision. But there are, an awful lot of there's inertia in the marketplace. There are structural impediments by incumbent players, and so you just need to be prepared and be realistic. And it's not just about technology. It's also about people and relationships, and about bringing and economics and bringing your solutions to market. So. Interestingly, my earlier work was really around technology and around a process, whereas the work I'm doing right now is about integrating other people's technology. So there are lots of different ways to approach the work that you do. It doesn't have to be just technology and innovation, moving from the lab to the marketplace. It can also be about trying to build a market, which is what we're trying to do right now. But no matter what it is, count on be really putting in an awful lot of work, and a lot of more work than you probably imagined, and bringing together more interested people to help support that work. What you're doing with investment dollars.
Very well said. Well, Seth, I really want to thank you for your time today. This has been a great conversation. We covered so much ground. I'm sure we could go on for a whole nother hour, and there's so much to talk about in this space.
Indeed. Well, I thank you again. It's great, as always, to have a conversation with you, and I look forward to any questions that may come out of it offline and through email afterwards. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and best of luck to you at everything you're doing at New Day.
Appreciate it. Goodbye.
Thanks to our audience for hanging with us today. This was great. We such a great discussion, so many great questions. We apologize, as usual, that we can't get to all of them. We'll put Seth's email and information about New Day Hydrogen in the chat in case you'd like to follow up. And I hope you'll join us again next month. Next month's episode will be our final one in this series. We are going to be talking about the road ahead for Colorado and clean energy on May 18th at the same time, 4 p.m. Mountain. Hope you'll join us. We're going to wrap up the series on a real high note. So look forward to that. In the meantime, you can catch up with the Institute on our social channels. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on the web at institute.dmns.org. Hope you have a great rest of the afternoon and be well.